emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Hey everyone, it's Fox from Model Making Guru here. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to part 2 of our build of the MPC 148 scale 22 inch. Is my workbench big enough? I don't know. 22 inch Eagle transporter from Space 1999 for emodels.co.uk. I think this must be one of the longest title videos I've done. Maybe the one with Drebbing Striker was longer. I'm not sure. I need to work on it. It's really beautifully sunny outside and it's really warm in here, so that's why these episodes are taking a while, because I can film in short bits, but it gets so hot in this room that I have to just, because I've got the lights on and the camera on and the computer on, it's like so yeah, that's why these episodes are a bit spread out, because it takes me so long to film it. Now don't worry, we've not whizzed ahead and forgotten you. I'm just sorting out the last bits of the decals here. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you getting all this painted up, so the back wall and the dudes. I've decided this one is Alan Carter. Alan Forever Alone Carter. I'll be showing you how to get them painted and how the faces didn't quite come out like I planned. Partially because I screwed up the paint order, and partially because the details are so soft on these figures. I'll be explaining a bit about the figures as well. And we'll get the back wall painted and everything all decaled up. So, I'm sweating now. I love summer because I can go outside and spray things, but I also don't like being inside painting things because it gets really warm. Anyway, I shall shut up. Let me go and I'll go and get this finished. You go off and get the rest of the video watched, and then at the end I'll come back and we'll see what's happened. Have fun. Okay, so here we are in the new camera setup. Thanks to the microphone I bought the other day, I can now use my webcam without the microphone and my microphone to do proper painting and show you figure painting. So let's crack on. We have these two figures to paint. These are the reproductions of the 1/24th scale Gemini pilots that were used in the original filming miniature. Now, some people have criticised the quality of these, saying they look nothing like Alpha Moon based spacesuits. They don't. It's a recreation of the original 1/24th Gemini pilot figure. The model is recreating the filming miniature, not recreating the fictional vehicle. So it's quite cool that they've gone to all the trouble of reproducing the figures that were used in the actual filming miniature, albeit half size. So we're going to get these guys painted, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go in with Orange Fire, the game colour Orange Fire, and we're going to just basically slap this all over. So what we're going to do is, I've got it over in my wet palette, which is just off screen, I can't get that close, so we get a little bit of paint on the brush, and for this I'm using a small flat brush. If you know your Citadel brushes, it's a base brush, but for this I'm just going to use a small flat brush, just because I need to get this everywhere. I'm not being particularly careful. Get some more paint on the brush. That's a little weak. 1 second, let's get some more. Yeah, I'm not being particularly careful about where this goes. We're just getting the base colour down first of all. So hopefully this is all working out with the camera. I'm not panicking that I'm getting it on bits that are going to be different colours, because they'll all come later on. So we're just making sure we get the paint on there. And as you can see, it is quite a transparent colour. So what we need to do is make sure that we do more than one coat. Might take 2 or maybe 3 coats to cover this. But but for this stage we're just slapping it on.
Slap it on.
Okay, now for the next step we've got to do the helmetings. For that we're going to use orange fire with a little touch of gold yellow, just to give a nice bright yellow. And quite simple, we're just going to slap it on.
Slap it on.
Now we don't need to be worried about being too neat round the collar, because if we make a mistake with the yellow, we can go back and clean up with the orange. And that's where it's important to use your wet palette, because the wet palette means the paint on the wet palette will stay workable for ages. So if you've got any custom mixes like I'm using here, then you can go back to them and keep using them, otherwise we've got to mix the paint again. So I'm not being particularly careful, so I'm just going to go around, get this helmet painted around the inside as well, and I'm not worrying about the face because that comes later. And it may take about 3 coats of this, because yellow is quite a translucent colour, so it may take about 3 coats. Okie dokie, so we have the helmet now done. I've tidied up around the bottom of the helmet. Still a little bit rough around the edges, but that's fine because we're going to do some washes to darken the edges. Next step is the gloves. Now on the actual costume, the gloves are a kind of off-white tan colour, and then the inside of the gloves are a sort of dark grey black colour, but we can't see the inside of the gloves, so that's fine. So what we're going to do, we're going to get ourselves, strangely enough, a mixture of off-white and tan, which gives us a lovely sort of just off-white colour. So I'm just going to get some of that, carefully paint it on the gloves. Now I'm going to go up to the collars here, the cuffs, because they're going to be white. So it's just a case of delicately painting these in, and as always it will take more than 1 coat to get a nice opaque colour. And if I do mess up again, just go in with the orange. The reason we're doing all these base colours now, because this is just the base colours, the reason we're doing all these base colours now is so that we can just get some nice crisp edges by touching in colours as we go along. Then we can start looking at putting some washes and things on there. Okay, so as you can see, the gloves have came out quite nice. I've gone ahead and painted the white cuffs as well. I'll do the chest piece in a minute in white, so you'll see that. Now, it is looking a little rough around the edge. Now, that's absolutely fine because of 2 things. First of all, we are going to use some washes anyway, so that'll hide any sort of semi-rough edges. But second of all, this is a really soft figure. The details are really, really soft, so it's hard to actually get any sort of crisp edges. So there is a bit of fudging going on here. You're not going to get a super realistic look, so we'll do the best we can with what we have. So the next step is we need to paint the chest part here, and for that we're going to use dead white, and as before we're just going to go in. I'm using a detail brush, fine detailing brush. We're just going to go in and we're going to slap it on.
Slap it on.
Now this will take several coats, obviously, because it's white, and white is the worst colour in the world to paint with, and also it's hard for me to paint at this angle, but let's give it a try. So what I'm going to do is just get it on there, and it will take several coats. And again, if I mess up and do any funny edges, it's not a problem, because I can go back and tidy up. And this is the same paint I used on the cuffs as well. Okay, so all the whites have now been done. The front box on there, the 2 cuffs. I put a couple of little white lines on what would be sort of shin pockets on this figure, but on the actual filming suit they had little white lines here, little zip pockets. And I've also painted in a line going down the middle and down the side of each leg. It's not super neat, but you're really not going to see this anyway, so it's just to give an impression of the actual zips. These are zips on the actual real suits. So I've ignored the hose that goes from the bottom of the box on the front here down under the arm. I've just kind of ignored that because that isn't on the filming suit. So we're just going to leave it there. We're not going to paint it like a proper hose. So what's next? Next is the boots. We need to get the boots done. So let me get an brush. Let me find an brush. Let's use this an brush. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a mixture of gold yellow and leather brown to make a wonderful sort of off, slightly dirty yellow tone. You'll see when I do it now. But we're going to paint the boots in this colour. Now the funny thing is, on the suit itself, on the actual filming suit, if I remember rightly, the trousers weren't actually tucked into the boots at all, and there were no sort of cuffs. So it means that basically they just had loose pants, which is great because it's a spacesuit and you just die. Space 1999, eh? So again, we're just going to go over these. As always, thin the paint a little bit with some water, just so you get a nice smooth coat. Just take a little bit off the brush there. And just work your way around. Again, a couple of coats will probably be fine. Okay, so you can see I've gone ahead a little bit. The boot's been done. I put the soles on the boots. If you look at the actual studio shot, they look kind of like wellies, basically. And again, the trousers aren't tucked in, which is kind of hilarious for a spacesuit, but they look like wellies with this sort of light white, sort of off-white colour sole, a bit like a sneaker, so I've painted those in. Gone ahead and done the straps here that hold the box on the front and a couple of little silver buckles. I've painted a dark colour for the skin, and I'll explain that as we go along, but I've painted a dark colour. It was a mixture of dwarf skin and tan mixed together just to give a dark flesh colour. A grey colour for the top of the helmet, the sort of padding inside, and the straps, and I've just used a silver colour for these two bits. Now in real life, in a Gemini Pilot, those were the things for the microphones, for the audio pickup from talking. Obviously in Space 1999 they don't have that. They don't have those little things. However, they're there on the mould, and I can't ignore them because it looks like he's got the world's biggest chin, cleft chin. So I'm going to have to bite the bullet and paint those in and just live with it, basically. Now it does look rough and ready, and that's absolutely fine because of the next stages. This is just blocking in the base colour, so it'll always look a bit pap. So if you're ever painting a figure and you're thinking, oh my god, it looks terrible, it's horrible, there's all brush marks and uneven bits, and don't worry, this is the whole point. Now the next step, Pete Mate's going to kill me because I'm going to have to use a Citadel product. What I want to do is a wash, but I don't want to use a wash with using thinned paint, and I'll explain why I'm going to have to use a Citadel product because I haven't got anything else at the moment. If you do a wash is just thinned paint, and a wash goes into the recesses and it's pulled away from the flat surfaces into the recesses by surface tension. A glaze, or in my case a shade, is a bit different. What you do is you take some matte medium, so it's basically paint without the pigment. It's called a medium, and you can get it, Vallejo do one. I think AK might do one, or you can get them from artist shops, things like that. It's basically a matte medium, it's just paint without pigment. And what you do is you add a tiny little bit of just normal acrylic water-based paint into it, and it colours it. But because it's basically just paint with no pigment, when you wash it over, instead of it just disappearing into the recesses, it behaves like a paint. It will stay on the surface and tint the surface part, but it will also be pulled down into the recesses. But it has a higher surface tension, so it's not going to disappear into the recesses. So it's not quite like a wash. Now, I don't actually have any matte medium here, and I'm keen to get on with this. I need to get this done. So I'm going to have to bite the bullet. Sorry, Pete, mate. I'm going to have to bite the bullet and use some shades, some Citadel shades. And for this, I'm going to use Reikland Flesh Shade. But you can make your own, like I say. Pop on 3 models, get some matte medium. They've got the Vallejo stuff. And whatever colour you want, you can just touch that paint, and you can make whatever colour shade you want. I'm going to call them shades, but they're also given other names like glazes or thick glazes. Some people just call them washes, and it could be easier. All we're going to do is we're going to take, in this case, our shade, our pre-made one. I would make my own, like I say, I just don't have any matte medium. And all we're going to do is get a big brush, and you know what we're going to do? Ted's going to come along and tell you, but we're just going to
Slap it on.
Now, it looked terrible at first. You'd be like, what the hell are you doing? Reikland Flesh Shade is kind of a reddy pinky brown. So we're just going to basically knock the camera. Different camera, and I'm still knocking it. We're going to apply it all over. Now, the trick with these kind of medium glazes, or shades if you want to call them that, is that you don't want it to accumulate. It will, because it doesn't really react as easily to surface tension, it will sit there and pool up and make patchy areas. So what you want to do is get it on the model and then just move it around. If you see it starting to pool up anywhere, just brush that excess somewhere else, like down in the crotch. It's always in the crotch on figures. But it will have the same function as a wash, so it will collect in the recesses and give some depth to your figure. But it will also tint the whole thing. Okay, so the shade is now dried, and as you can see, it's not done a massive amount, but it's given a bit more depth to the figure. It tones down the whites and the oranges a bit, puts a little bit of a shade or a shadow into the helmet. There's a bit of a splob there, but that's fine. and it looks kind of messy now. But this is where the next step comes in. Now this might seem really weird to do this, but what we're going to do is we're going to paint it again. Basically, first step we're going to do after we've done the shade is to go back over with the original colours. So the yellow, the orange, the whites, the sort of tan colour, to go back over it with the same colours again. However, we're going to do it a little bit differently than we did before. What we're actually going to do is go over it again to bring back the nice brightness, because these are clean spacesuits. But we're going to, if we can, avoid the areas where there's, say, a recess, just so we can keep that shade in the recess. And I'll explain I'll show you what I mean. Let me get some paint on my brush. For example, on Thelmet, what we're going to do is we're going to repaint. That's the right colour, yes. We're going to repaint the helmet. Now you can see the difference in colour here. But what we'll do is we'll go up to the edge there almost, but we won't go right all the way up. We'll just avoid it a little bit. And here we'll go around, but there's this little lip round the front of the helmet. I don't know if it'll come out on camera. So I'm just going to get some more paint. What we're going to do is go up to that, but just get right towards it and then just stop. And again, as before, we'll probably have to do a couple of coats of this. And I need to do the same with the orange and the whites and all the other colours we've painted. So I'll go and get that done. But this is what we're going to do. We're going to try and keep the shade in the recesses. Okay, so I've gone over all the colours with the colours again, as you can see. It's looking a bit different now. What do I need to tell you? Basically went over all the colours with the original colours, just to bring it back, so we kept some lowlights. The orange, unfortunately, just came out the same, pretty much, with a few little dark shaded areas, but you can see it there, especially around the crotch area. Everything centres around the crotch. I don't know, on model making, I don't know why. I also went over the face. Now I went over the face with rosy flesh. Very thinned in water, just carefully built it up across the brow, the cheeks, the top lip and the nose, just using a fine brush. It's a bit rough and ready. I say it's not brilliantly perfect. The moulding on these figures is quite soft and I'm struggling quite a lot to stick to the details. If this was a Tamiya figure or a Warhammer figure or something like that, then the details would be crisp and well sculpted and it'd be a joy to paint. But this is kind of challenging because the details are so rough. So yeah, so it's not brilliant. But it's going to be in the cockpit, you're hardly going to see it, and there'll be an orange light on it anyway to soften everything. So you can see it's all come out now. The next step, now the shade's on and the base colours are returned, is to bring out some highlights. So what we're going to do, I'm not really going to do anything on, well I might do a little bit on the helmet around the ridge here, but most of it's going to be on the orange of the EVA suit. And all we're going to use for that is we're going to use orange fire, with a little bit of gold yellow mixed in. So it's the same as the base colour, but some gold yellow to lighten it. So and all we're going to do is we're going to get some of the paint, and we're quite simply going to take them off there, because it's a pain in the bum. Quite simply going to work on the highlight areas. So things like the shoulder here. Now it looks a bit stark when I paint it on. It looks a bit blaringly obvious, but it will blend in a little bit as it dries. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick out the raised area. So if there's a crease, for example, we're going to stay away from the recess and we're going to pick out the raised part. And like I say, it's not my best figure ever, and the way I like to think of these things is it's like an impressionist painting. Because I'm not brilliant at painting figures, I don't really go for a realistic look. I go more for, it's kind of an impressionistic, it's an impression of what it would look like. It's a suggestion, because you're never going to see it very close anyway. You're going to see it kind of from a distance, or in this case in the cockpit. So it doesn't have to be photorealistic. I mean, if you've got the skills and talents to paint in a photorealistic style, then by all means, for the love of dog, go for it. I don't. Figure painting is one of my weak points. Now what I'm going to do, these do look a bit stark, but when the paint starts to wear off the brush a little bit, what I tend to do is just keep brushing it and fade it a little bit before I reload the brush, just to give a bit of a fade. Now if you look at the spacesuits, the EVA suits, they're kind of made out of the same stuff as sleeping bags, it looks like. So they've got a kind of strange texture to them, which gives us a bit of an excuse to work on this. They're also kind of ribbed. It really is like a giant orange sleep. I'm sure basically they just got a load of sleeping bags and made some EVA suits out of them. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to tease the paint around so it's not quite as obvious as these stripes. And it's very similar to the last section. We're just going to work the paint in and try and get some nice shades. We'll probably cover quite a lot of it, but we'll keep the darker orange in there. And as the paint's running off the brush here, you can see I'm just blending it so it's not such a stark contrast. And that's all we're going to do. I'm going to go around the whole of the EVA suit and do that, and do on the other figure as well. What is next? I'll also have to do the same thing again on the face. For that I'm going to use cadmium skin with a little bit of grey, and that's going to be purely for the highlights, so just like the brow, the nose, and the very cheeky, sticky out cheeky bits of the cheeks, maybe a little bit of the top lip. Just a real highlight and really thin down. The whites we don't need to highlight. The gloves I'm going to leave as they are. And then I think we'll put a little lighter grey on the straps just to highlight them a little bit. And then we're on to the next step then, which is redoing all the metallics and the other things. So, I've not really focused on the boots much either. Because the boots are a bit... You're not really going to see the boots, and they're a bit of a bad sculpt. So, I've just kind of given up on those. You're not really going to see them anyway, so I've given up the will to live with those. So, we'll leave those. And there are decals to go on this as well. So, I'll go and crack on with this, and we'll come back in a moment. Okay, so the pilots are done, all the major painting is done. What's left to do, if I keep dropping them, what's left to do, I can't keep hold of these, what's left to do is the decals, because we need to get them on the arms and the chest plate, the chest box thing. We need to give it a matte varnish, obviously, and then we need to put a gloss varnish on the helmet so it's nice and shiny, because that is shiny. Like I said earlier on, I didn't really worry about the feet too much, you're hardly going to see them, so they're just, I kind of just gave up on those and left them as they are. Now, the flesh tones, didn't quite come out as I planned. They came out looking a bit monkey-like, and the eye sockets are a bit dark. I did go wrong with the paint. I put the very dark colour down first as a base colour, then I went over with the wash, and then I did the light and the medium and the light flesh tones. Unfortunately, what I should have done, because I wasn't thinking right, is done the very dark colour, then the medium colour, and then the wash, and then the highlights with the lighter colour. So they came out looking a bit fleshy but pallid. They're fine. I mean, you know, you're going to see them in the cockpit. They'll look fine. They'll be bathed in the orange glow from the LEDs anyway. And when the light's not on, they'll be really dark, so you'll see them in shadows. The eye sockets came out a bit dark, but then again, it just helps sort of bring those to your attention when you see them in the cockpit with the lights off. But other than that, they're looking pretty good. So I need to, as I say, give it a matte varnish, put the decals on the arm and the chest, and then just brush on some gloss varnish onto the helmet, a couple of coats of gloss varnish on the helmet to give it a nice glossy finish. So we'll have a look at those once that's done. In the meantime, we need to crack on with the back wall. Now I'm going to show you a picture of the back wall, but remember we painted this, or we sprayed this rattle candid with the Tamiya primer, so it's just off white. So if we have a look at the back wall, you'll see it's actually quite simple. It's not really complex. And what we can do here, like I said at the start, I'm going to try and keep this build as straightforward as possible just for people who are beginners. So I'm not going to necessarily go into a ton of airbrush work. So we're going to do this by brush. Now the colours are quite simple. The whites in the photograph you can see are just kind of off-white. So we can actually use this primer as the white colour if we can paint neat enough. If it goes wrong, we can go over them in white. So we needed the tan colour for the back wall. We need the orange and the sort of reddy brown orange for the bit round the door. And then some darker colours for these panels here, because that one's white. So, should be fairly straightforward. Let's crack on. First thing we're going to do is we are going to take some khaki, and I've mixed a little bit of white into the khaki to lighten it. And what we need to do is do a little bit of painting around these raised details, just to get that done neatly, and then we can go in with a bigger brush just to get it all on. And because we're brush painting this, the trick is to keep your paints thinned a little bit with the water and go lightly. So I've got myself a fine little detail brush. I'm going to put a little bit of water in the paint just to get it going. It's never advisable, even with the best of paints, it's never advisable to paint straight from the pot or the bottle, because you're going to get a smoother finish. I'm just getting the paint on the brush now. You're going to get a smoother finish if you thin it a little bit and build the colour up. So, and you'll see on the other film I had all paint on my hands, because what I like to do is get any excess off and just get a point on the brush like that. So what we want to do is, to start with, just work our way around these little raised details, and this is easier to do with this kind of brush than it is with my big base brush later on. And I'm going lightly. This won't be enough, I'll have to do a couple of these. But what I tend to find is easiest, if you get the brush, a good brush like this, and you push it flat, so you get a nice solid flat edge, and that way you can run the paint along the edge and keep it nice and neat. If you go in like this with the brush pointy, you'll just get splats and splots and you'll get paint on the white bits. So keep your brush at a flat angle, get any excess off on your finger, and just very carefully do it on that end. Just try and get a shadow so you can see what you're doing, and just run the brush along, edge on, so it catches on the edge and doesn't necessarily go all over the bit you want to keep white. And this will be easier than painting everything tan and then going in with white paint to try and catch the edge, because then you're trying to paint this very slight raised edge with white and you're just going to get white on the tan. You're going to be going backwards and forwards to build that up. So very straightforward. We're just going to go around and do all these raised bits. So here, for example, on this part here, this is raised. Okay, so we've blocked in those little edges and corners. So now it's time to go in with a slightly bigger brush. I'm using a small flat brush here. It's not quite a round pointy one, it's a bit more flatter. And it's ideal for covering a large area, but also getting in flat when you want to get to an edge. So we can use exactly the same paint. Again, thinned a little bit with water. Take most of it off, and we're going to, as before, build this up slowly. Okay, so you can see now that's all been done. That was about 3 layers of the paint. Came out quite nice. As I say, it's not airbrush smooth. It never will be because you brush painted. But this is inside. It's going to be dark. You're not going to see it. And when you see it, like in the windows, you're going to see a little bit. So it's absolutely fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing, you know, full airbrush on every single component. But especially with a big build like this, sometimes it's worth doing the simpler things just because it's diminishing returns. I could spend days and days airbrushing and pre-shading and everything on this cockpit wall, but for the little you're going to see of it, it's not worth it. It's no harm in doing that, but it's diminishing returns. You'll know it's there, so there's no harm in going whole hog. But for the sake of this build, I'm going to keep this bit simple because it doesn't need to be too complex. Anyway, so that's been done. So next bit we need to do is this bit around the door, and that's going to be in 2 colours. We're going to use the orange fire for the main base colour, so we'll get that on first. And again, exactly the same as before, like when we went around the edges. I'm going to get the paint on my brush, get a little bit of water in there, just so it's not fully straight from the pot. And all you need to do is, first of all, be very careful. Now we need to be really neat here because we're going to have to go down this edge, but we don't want to get anything on the door, so we'll paint the outside first. I'm going to put the brush at a 45-degree angle, and I'm just going to paint this top surface. And because I do it at a 45-degree angle, I'm going to go slowly, and I've got the paint thinned a little bit. It means I can control it, and it will very nicely go up to the edge there. And again, as before, it may take several coats to get full coverage. Okay, now for the next step, and the next step is to add the little red accent, or the dark red accent points. Now the orange bit's done, and it looks a bit bright, but we're going to be darkening this down. I was neat as I could be around the edges on the inside of the door. There's a few little slips here and there, but they'll be hidden when we do the darkening down. So the next step is, I've got some bloody red. It's called bloody red, I'm not swearing. And we need to paint the accent points, and they are at the top here, 2 here, and 1 at the bottom. Now it should be, looking at the reference photo, there's this corner piece, there's 1 big piece, and then there's 1, 2, 3, 4 little pieces, and these are the red ones. And there's the bit in the middle, and there's a bit down at the bottom, which is this section here, which you might not be able to see. But those are the bits I need to paint. So let me get my little brush, and we'll get some red. And this is exactly the same process as for the orange, but we're just going over now with the red, just to darken it down. So I'll get a little bit off my finger. And I'll get a bit more because that wasn't very much at all. There's very little paint. There we go. Right, so we shall paint. Okay, so that's all painted, looking nice. Now we just need to darken it down a little tiny bit and add some relief to these sections of the door. Now on the real thing, obviously there's no shading here, but this is a miniature, so we're going to make it look a bit more in relief. And what we're going to do is we're going to do some I was going to say shading, but we're going to use a wash, or a sort of wash, in these recessed areas and around the whole rim. And we're going to do the same on the outside as well, but just in the recesses. So what we need to do, I've got myself some matte medium with a little bit of brown colour in there. And all we're going to do is very carefully, first of all, we're going to put some just in these recesses. And we're just going to touch it to the corner, hopefully it's on camera, touch it to the edges and the corners and just drop it in there. And it should give us a nice little hint of relief. Just a little tiny amount. It will fade a little as it dries. But I'm being super gentle. I'm not washing it all over. I'm just going in very carefully. Now the reason I'm using a matte medium and not a thin wash, you could just thin this with water and that'd be absolutely fine. But I just want this to be a little bit more subtle now. It is a bit splotchy around the edges, but it's not the end of the world, because once it's in the vehicle and installed, you're not going to see that. So don't worry if it's not perfectly spot on. You could, this was a ever so slightly off white colour, so you could go in and just whiten it back up again, and we may well do, just to give some relief. But we'll put this on here for now and see what it comes out like. We want to show a little bit of wear and tear maybe. And then on the main part, use a slightly bigger brush, and all we're going to do on the main part is just go in, and we're just going to cover the whole thing. And this is to go into all the little recesses. Get a bit of excess off there. Go into all the recesses and darken them up, and also just to darken the colour overall, because it's not supposed to be quite as bright as the spacesuits. And what I might do is put say one coat over the orange and 2 or 3 coats over the red, just to darken down the red even more. So we'll work our way around and see what comes out the other end. Okay, so you can see that wash has now dried. Now, it is important, you might be thinking to yourself, why didn't I just do a gloss varnish and then a pin wash, which would have had exactly the same effect as this? You'll also notice this looks a lot neater than it did when I first started doing that painting. Very simple. I wanted to keep some shading. Let me get something to point with. I wanted to keep some sort of shading in the recesses, but I wanted to get a kind of slightly squishy effect to these bits around the doors, because they're supposed to be sort of padded things. And if I just did a pin wash, they'd still look kind of flat. What I wanted to do, and what I did do, was instead of doing the gloss varnish and then a pin wash, using that wash I had, it was a bit messy around the edges. There were little, bits where it had seeped out from the recesses. It had kind of tendrilled its way out, capillary action, and made a bit of a mess. It all looked a bit scruffy and rough. All I did was go back over with the original base colours to tidy it up. Now what I did do was go a lot thinner than normal. The paints were really quite watered down, so it was almost like a glaze. I was building up the colour, so instead of just taking, say, this bit here, this red bit, and painting the red over the top, and then you've got red with the lines, because I used it thin, I could build it up in numerous very, very thin coats, like a glaze, and that way I could focus the paint in the middles and not so much on the edges, so you still get some darkness around the edges. And I just did that on the whole thing. Because I wanted that effect on here, I thought I may as well just do the whole thing that way. Put the wash on and then go back and tidy up with the thin down paints. You can do it either way. Doing a pin wash over a gloss varnish is a lot faster, but I think this gives me a bit more fuzziness to the shading, which is fine. And given the fact it's going to be in the cockpit and dark most of the time, it may look a bit harsh and stark here, but obviously once you see it in situ, even with the lights on, it'll come out quite nice. Now everything's been painted. I took these outside. It was a nice sunny day, and again it's a nice sunny day today. It's 1 trillion degrees in here, and I matte varnished them. For that I used the Humbrol Rattle Can Matte 49 acrylic varnish. Now I can't recommend this stuff enough. If you're doing a quick blast of matte varnish over something, maybe just like these little bits. And you don't want to necessarily get the airbrush out, do the varnishing, then clean the airbrush out and mess around. Sometimes rattle can varnish is fine. There are lots of different rattle can varnishes. I know eModels stock the what's it called now? Mr. Top Coat. That's pretty good. I just personally like these ones, the Humbrol Matte 49. Thing to look out for is it's obviously Humbrol. It must say acrylic varnish, not enamel varnish. There's two different ones. They're both number 49, which is really confusing. It must say in acrylic. If it says enamel, I can't guarantee what will happen when you spray it over acrylic paint. It could go horribly wrong. You could get alligatoring and horrible crackle patterns. So make sure if you use acrylic paints, acrylic varnish. If you used enamel paints, you can still use acrylic varnish. Just make sure this has had several days to fully cure. And it does say on the top, Varnish Matte 49. So there you go. That's my personal preference for just going outside quickly and blasting some stuff on. Have to make sure it's dry outside though and not damp or humid or wet. So you know, it's all right in the cold. If you're doing this outside in the cold, then and it's not wet, it's just a little bit cold, just put this floating around in a jar or a jug of pretty warm water, maybe even hot water. It'll warm up the varnish inside, and when you spray it, it'll be a nice even coat. It won't be all lumpy and bumpy, because if this stuff's cold, it can go on a bit blotchy. So if it is a bit cold outside, just leave this for a few minutes in some hot water. Take that out with you when you spray, and it'll be quite nice. And do it outdoors. If you spray this indoors, everybody in the house will hate you completely forever. So there you go. Now, the next step is the decals, the water slide decals. Now again, I'm going to go off-piste here a little bit. Traditionally, what you do is you put a gloss varnish down, you put the decals on, you put another gloss coat on to protect them, and then you go ahead with your weathering. However, again, I'm going to avoid having to use an airbrush here. I would have to airbrush the gloss varnish on, let it dry for 24 hours, do the decals and so on and so on. Because this is inside, it's never going to come into contact with grabby hands, and it's not at risk from anything touching the decals. It's not really cutting a corner, but I can save myself some time. There's no reason for me to overprotect the decals on the interior because they're never going to be at risk. And this is the trick about model making. Yes, there are certain ways to do things that will give you best results, but sometimes you don't always need to do the whole process. If it's going to be inside, if it's going to be mostly in darkness, if it's never going to be in contact with grabby fingers or anything like that, you don't need to necessarily worry about it. And because these decals are so small, doing them on top of a matte surface, it's not so bad. I'm not really going to have to worry about silvering or anything like that too much, because you're not going to see it. It's not going to have much chance to do any silvering. The reason you use a gloss coat is it gives you a nice smooth surface and it helps reduce air getting under the decal. With these things, they're so small and they're going to be inside, it's going to be mostly dark. You can avoid that step. I mean, there's nothing wrong at all with gloss varnishing it, decals, gloss varnish for decals, but there's no weathering to go over this. There's going to be nothing else on top of this once the decals are on, so it's not a problem at all. So let's get these decals done. Let me get everything ready and we'll do that. Okay, right, it's decal times now. If you've watched any of my other builds, you'll know exactly what's coming now. What I'm going to show you now is how to apply water slide decals without using water. It's a method I totally stole from Tony over at Helgen35, who also films for eModels, so go and watch his big tank build. And for this method, we just need 4 things. Micro Sol, Micro Set, both from Microscale Industries, both available at eModels, and a couple of pairs of tweezers. Now I do get people telling me I shouldn't use tweezers for this, but I'll explain in a minute why I use tweezers. You can do. Ideally if you don't, but you can do if you know what you're doing. Now there's not a lot of decals for this, there's just a couple of bits. There's the eagle number marking for the door here. I've decided to make this eagle one, which means one of these little pilots is Alan Forever Alone Carter. Bless him, Alan Carter, what a legend. And then we've got the decals for the outfits. You've got the chest parts here, the left arm from our point of view, right arm from the figure's point of view, and the one for the other arm, the completely strange multicoloured symbols. But the process is the same for all of these. Now, like I said, I'm doing this over a matte varnish. Normally you do it over a gloss, but I don't need to worry too much. They're so small, you're not going to have any major problems with silvering. And these are cartograph details, which are very, very good and very well behaved anyway, so even more. If you've got some cheapy kit with unknown decals, you might not want to risk it, but these will behave. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our decal here, which is the number 1, which is tiny. I need to make sure it's not upside down. And instead of using water, what we're going to do is we're going to use the Micro Set blue one. The way it works is, this is the first one you use for setting your decals, getting them onto the model, making sure they bed down. Once they're on and that's dried, then what you're doing is going in with coats later on of microsol, which is the thing that softens them up, dissolves bits of the clear film and helps them bed down even more and look more painted on. So we start with microset. I'm going to stick it down on my little placemat there. I do recommend sticking these down on something, because if you knock them over, you will be sad. And all we're going to do is take a brush. I've got a brush for microset and a brush for microsol. They're two different products. I don't want to cross-contaminate them, so I've got one for each. And all we're going to do is, first of all, going to take our decal here. You see, there's the decal there, and we're going to just basically soak it in the microset. And this is in place of soaking it in water. Now you can do it with water, it's just this is a very, if you've got lots of little tiny decals to do, this is just a bit quicker than messing about with water and all that kind of shenanigans and dipping them and waiting. You can just do it this way, it's much faster. If you've got a lot of decals to get through, this just works out a bit faster. So what we're going to do is we're going to see if that's moving. Oh yes, nicely. Told you these were good decals. Now this bit I'm going to do with tweezers. Some people scream and shout at me when I do that and say you should use, what am I doing? You should use a brush to get the decal off the paper. They are correct. Ideally you want to, because you don't want to damage the decal when you're moving it around. But I'll be honest, I've been doing this for 35 years. It's not that I know what I'm doing, I just know how to work the decals to my advantage and use tweezers very gently. So I'm confident with my tweezers that I'm not going to rip or tear a decal. So we put the decal on, and what I need to do now is start moving it about. Now because you've used the microset, it may be a bit more reluctant to move around than if you use water. So if you need to, just go in and put some more microset on there. Not too much, you don't want to drown it, because do be aware, microset and microsol can eat away at acrylic varnishes and top coats. They won't damage the paint, but if you've got a top coat on there, like me, you've got a matte or a gloss varnish, they can eat away at it a little bit, so just be careful, be gentle. I need to get this in the middle, so I'm just going to maneuver, I like that word, maneuver. There, and there we are, that's it, done. And it's as simple as that. Now like I say, I do get told off for using tweezers. It's just because I've been doing this for so long. I know exactly how much pressure to put on. When I push the decal around, I push it, not always, but for as much as I can, I push it from outside the decal, push the edge to move it around if it's been stubborn. If when I first try and move it, it doesn't want to budge, I don't force it. I then, like I've just seen me do there, put more microset on there. Now this microset will allow this just to bed down. You can see there it's kind of shiny compared to the matte background. Not a problem. The microset will allow it to bed down, so I need it to sort of sit here for 5 or 10 minutes. Once that's dried out, and it's had about 10-15 minutes total, what I will then do is go with the microsol. So I'll show you that in a second. I'll leave this for about 5, 10, 15 minutes, and I'll go and do the decals on the dudes. Back in a second. Okay, so that's at about 10 or 15 minutes. You can see it's looking quite nice and flat now, still a bit shiny. What we need to do now is go in with the microsol. Now it's not so important on these parts, on this decal, but it is important on the ones on the dudes. Now what microsol does is it softens the decal further and helps it conform to any irregular surfaces. And it also, a little tiny bit, sort of eats away at the clear film. So if you've got a big load of clear film around the edge of the decal, around the edge of the marking, it can help reduce that. So what we'll do, we'll just get the brush, the other brush this time. This is my microsol brush. Get a good brush worth. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be careful. We're not going to slap it everywhere. We're just going to apply it on top of the actual decal itself and just a little bit over the edge. Now the reason you don't want to slap it everywhere, like I said, is sol and set can actually affect your top coat that's underneath the decal, like your gloss or your matte varnish. Again, for most decals using a gloss coat. See, I've gone too heavy there, so I'm just going to wick some of it away. Get off. But what you want to be able to do is get the microsol to get underneath the decal. If there are any little air bubbles or gaps or anything like that, you want it to be able to sort of capillary action and wick underneath. And as it softens it, it will help it pull down to the surface. And like I said, because these are indoors and it's a fairly flat surface anyway, I'm not too bothered. It should be absolutely fine, even though I've matte coated it. if I was doing the exterior of the vehicle, which I will do obviously later on, I'd do a gloss coat first, because that's where people are going to see these, scrutinise them and be able to move the heads around and check the light. But for these ones, not so much. So that's on there, coat of that. I'm going to give that about another 10 or 15 minutes. Now in this case, because it's a flat decal on a flat surface, 1 or 2 applications should be absolutely fine. By the time we've finished, that should look a bit more painted on. I've done the ones on the figures. Now they've just been applied for the moment. See if we can get these in focus, might be a good idea. There we go. So these are actually on now, and you can see here the ones on the arms, they're kind of sticking out. They're not exactly flush to the arm, especially that one there. That's fine. That's absolutely fine, because all I need to do, because it's a curved surface, you could cut down the middle of the decal so it can fold over the curved surface. That's one option, but you can get raggedy edges. The other thing you can do is get it on there with the micro set, leave it a little while, let it bed down at the top here so it's glued in place, and then what I'll do is successive coats of micro sol, just to help the decal fold over the arm and conform to the strange shape. And then eventually what you should see is these will then be nice and flush to the arm. They'll not be quite so shiny, and they'll look more like they're printed on rather than actually just stuck on the top. So I'm going to probably have a play with these with probably many coats of the microsol, maybe like 5 or 6 coats, but I'll see how it goes. And then once that's been done, what I will do is I'll give him a quick blast of matte varnish again, just to be safe. I may as well. I know I've said I wasn't going to, but I may as well. It's a sunny day outside. Take me 5 minutes to rattle can these. And once that's done, we then need to sort out the glossy parts, which are basically the helmets and these pillow things at the back here, which for some reason are shiny. So I'll get all those decals sorted out. When we come back, I'll have given them another quick blast of matte just to get everything locked in, and we'll get the gloss done. So I'm back in a moment. I like contradicting myself. I like saying I'm not going to do this, and then I do it. It's how my brain works. I don't plan these things. You should know that by now. I don't plan stuff. Back in a moment. Okay, so that's everything done now. The decals have gone on quite nicely. There's about 6 coats of the microsol in the end. The original microset, as you saw, the decals were sticking up. All I did was I went around and did coat after coat of microsol with sort of 10 or 15 minutes between each. And just before the last coat, when it was all fully dry, I went around with the cotton bud and just squished them in a little bit more, just to make sure they were really bedded down, and got them on. So you can see now they're looking pretty good. Quite pleased with the chest pieces. So they've all been matte varnished. That's ready to go. The last thing we need to do now is bring the shine back to the helmets and these pillow things. And all we're going to use for that is some Pledge Floor Care Finish 2 times more shine. 2 times more shine. But any gloss varnish will do. Any gloss varnish that you can brush. And our Pledge Floor Care Finish 2 times more shine. 2 times more shine. Is only available in the US. So if you do want to get some, it's going to cost you a fortune. So I wouldn't recommend it. But yes, you can get other things like Alclad Aqua Gloss and other ones. Just make sure that the varnish you're going to use is brushable. That's the most important thing. It must be brushable. Some of them aren't. So yeah. And this couldn't be easier. All we're going to do is get the Pledge on the brush. And we're just going to quite simply just get some of the excess off. We're just going to go over the bits we need to go shiny again. So first, when you first put it on, it's going to look a bit weird. It's going to probably suck into the texture of the matte varnish a little bit and come out not shiny. It'll be probably ever so slightly satin or something like that, but that's fine. What you want to do is get a coat of it on here, give it a good, oops, excessive, give it a good half hour, 45 minutes, and then go over again with another coat. You might need to do 2, maybe 3 coats of this, depending on what level of shine you want. And it does pay to be a bit generous. Stuff like this and other gloss varnishes, they're actually designed to do some sort of self-leveling. That's how gloss varnishes work. Everything levels out and gives you a smooth surface. So they are designed to self-level to a certain degree. So if you put it on quite thin, it's not really going to do that. It's not going to have a chance to do that. So do put it on a little bit thick, not splash it everywhere. And do give it several coats. You might find it goes a little bit darker as well with the gloss coat, but again, that's fine, it doesn't matter. So the yellow might go a little bit darker when I do it. And I'm going to do that off camera because it's quite fiddly. I need to make sure I get it on the helmet and not his face. Don't want him to have a shiny face. So that's where I'll do it, and I'll leave it here. So once this is done, I just need to glue the pilots in, and then the back wall is completely finished then. So that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. See if I can get these guys to stand up. Will they sit up? No, they won't. Okay, never mind. Thank you so much for watching. As always, this is filmfreemodels.co.uk, so do go along to their website, emodels.co.uk. That's kind of obvious. The UK's leading online model retailer. Absolutely brilliant store. They have everything you need: models, tools, paints, brushes, everything you can think of you'd need, they'll have it. I always joke and say if they haven't got it, you don't need it. It's pretty much true. If there is something specific you want, either they'll have an equally good alternative, trust me, or if there is something absolutely specific that you want, it has to be that thing, and it's not on the website. It either means it's just gone out of stock temporarily and they'll be getting some more in, or it's not something they carry necessarily normally. But give them a shout, drop them an email and just say, hey, I'm looking to get such and such. Can you tell me when it's back in stock? Or if it's not in stock, can you tell me if you can get hold of it from one of your distributors? More often than not, it'll either be back in stock soon or it's something they can get hold of. I've seen them order kits that they don't normally stock for customers who said, can you get me a specific kit that you don't have? And they've done it. So they are really, really nice guys. So go along, emodels.co.uk. Go along to their Facebook group, facebook.com/emodels.ltd. Nice little group. Hang out, show off your work, look at other people's work, ask people questions. You can also check out and ask them when things will be back in stock. Also keep your eyes open on the Facebook page for special offers and things like that. And we also post up there when Ted and I are going to do the eModels Monday live stream on a Monday at 9 p.m. every Monday, 9 p.m. GMT. Me and Ted talking nonsense for an hour and a half, 2 hours, answering your questions. And there's other builds by Ted. Ted's doing his 333-foot long U-boat. Tony's doing his big tank. We've just about finished it, I think. But he's doing his big tank, and there'll be more stuff to come. So go and check it out. But again, thank you so much for watching. Do take care of yourselves. If you're building this along, hope you're enjoying it. It is really good fun. But until next time, go make something awesome, go be awesome, and adios amoebas.